Hi, everyone. Welcome to our session. I will tell you right now, I don't have a time delay, so I will not be able to moderate any comments from this panel. And I have a feeling things might get a little bit wild, or at least I hope they do, as part of this conversation. So I thought what we would do just to kind of warm up here is do a little bit of rapid fire fun to break the ice. So I am going to start with Danielle and then down the line. And my quick question is going to be favorite drink.
Yes.
Well, I thought about this and I was like, do I have to say one of the Focus Brands drinks? No. So it is a turmeric chai latte. I had one at Google today.
You are.
All right.
I don't know if this is good or bad, but I automatically went to alcohol. So I'll just say I'm a bourbon neat drinker, unless I don't want to look like a psycho, and then it's an old fashioned.
I'm down to look like a psycho. Macallan 12 or 18 if someone else is buying. Big Rock, no chaser.
All right. Danielle, do you want to modify your answer? No.
All right,
No.
Tito's blue cheese olive martini.
Yes.
Okay. Next up, current binge watch.
My kids have caught me up on Stranger Things, so I'm behind the times, but it's a binge watch for me.
All right. Sarah?
House of Dragons. It's tragically beautiful.
I'm so old school. I am actually binge watching all 9 seasons of Frasier.
All right.
It's just in a very different direction.
The people want to know pumpkin pie or apple pie?
Both. With
Okay.
ice cream.
All right. Fair enough. Sarah?
Pumpkin.
Girl, I'm a black woman with deep roots in the South. It is sweet potato pie.
Okay, and then my last question, and sometimes when I ask this to my team, I make them correct their answer. So if you could do anything beside marketing, but you can't say like accountant or something, like mine is I would be in Cirque du Soleil. I don't have the training for
Hey,
that.
we know people.
I can't, I can't even do a cartwheel, but that's what I would choose if I could do anything. What would you choose? Don't say accountant.
I don't know who would say accounting. Marine biologist.
Sorry.
All right, marine biologist, that's a good one.
Pastry chef. And true story, I almost quit my freshman year of college to go to pastry school.
Oh, that's a good one, okay.
Personal shopper. I'd spend your money buying stuff all day.
All right, so now I think we've gotten some laughs here. I think we're a little bit warmed up. And so the first question, it's an interesting one, and it's one that I felt like the answers were super feisty in our pre-chat. But the title of our session is Driving Women's Leadership in Advertising and Marketing. And so I thought I would start with Sarah and just kind of say, Sarah, what does that mean to you?
She's starting with me because she knows exactly how I feel about this. And if you've seen me speak before, it's on one hand, I think it's total bullshit that we're still having conversations titled Women in Marketing. But the flip side of that is I am a mother of 2 daughters and inequality still exists. And so until it is equitable, we have to use these opportunities to further drive equality. So, but it's still bullshit.
Danielle?
Similar to that, I was thinking first, what is it not, or what should it not be, which is a justification of women in leadership roles or a comparison of women to men. That, to me, has zero benefit, but nurturing conversations about what does equity look like, more importantly and deeper, what does diversity and perspective look like, because that's the reality of the heart of building a strong leadership team.
Yeah, and I think to riff for 1 second, I really liked what you talked about like mimicking your customer and needing that when you're building your team. So do you want to tell everyone a little bit about that?
It's so important. I mean, at the end of the day, I think whether you're talking about in the business world, whether you're talking about in your community, you need to be involved and you need to reflect the community or communities that you live in. And so for everyone who doesn't know what Focus Brands is for a second, because this will make more sense in a minute. We are everything from Cinnabon, Auntie Anne's, to Moe's, McAllister's, Jamba Juice. So we have a variety of brands with a whole bunch of different personalities that serve a whole bunch of different communities. And it's radically important that both at an individual store level, we work with our franchisees to reflect their community, and that we do that as leaders through our organization. And it's one of the things that I have a personal passion for, and we'll take the time to ask that question as we're bringing new people in, right? Are we reflecting our customers? Because at the end of the day, if you're not, how do you really put the customer first in what you're doing?
Yeah, that's great. And we're going to talk a little bit more about challenging people internally in a second. But first, I want to turn it to Beverly and kind of ask her what this topic means to her.
I think for me, it is community and networking. It's finding not just the opportunity for myself to be self-proclaimed as a leader or an executive or a woman in marketing and advertising, but actually the people that surround me and the people that make up what I consider to be my community of advertisers and marketers. Because the more diverse that community is, the broader the perspective of the people that are reflected, it improves my work, it challenges their work, it challenges norms, and it breaks down those silos. So that's what it means for me until, as Sarah says, until it's not that thing anymore and not necessary.
Yeah, when they asked me to moderate this panel, that's kind of what I was thinking. It's like it's part of the reason we started all of our pre-chats with like, what does this topic even mean? And it was just interesting to hear the same perspectives from all of you on it. And so one of the things, and actually I feel like Linda talked about this a little bit earlier, you all mentioned stories of someone like lifting you up in your career, like having that support. Can you talk a little bit about, I want there to be tangible takeaways for everyone. So how can we lift each other up? Like, how can we make sure that we're supporting other women, like on their career journeys, helping them get to the top, pulling them up with us? And maybe we'll start with you, Danielle, on this one.
Yeah, and it's interesting listening to actually the prior speaker. She talked about having a challenging boss, and through my career, and that making you stronger, right? So through my career, one of the first female leaders that I worked for and with in consulting was very, very difficult. And actually an example of a woman who really was not lifting up, but rather competing with other women. And so it was very, very challenging for me, very traumatizing for me at that early stage in my career, but it was a learning lesson, right? For me to say, what am I going to channel into the rest of what I can contribute as a leader, and who am I going to seek out in my community, and who am I going to ask to help sponsor me as other female leaders throughout my career? And so you take from some of those hard times, and through that was able to actually say, you know what, I'm going to go ask, I'm going to advocate for myself, I'm going to find other senior leaders when I was still midway through my career and ask for someone to take the time to tell me what that looks like, to spend the time to mentor you. And now I do that the other way around. You know, even folks who aren't seeking it out, if you see someone who is really qualified, particularly early in their career, because I think it's so important. In advertising and marketing, there's been so much fragmentation. The career paths that were there 20 years ago, where it was pretty clear how you grow into a CMO, is not the same today. It's not the same in the media side of the business. It's not the same in the client side of the business. And so I think that's on us to reach out, find talent, find other women, and sort of show that path, help create that path, and mentor in a different way that is, it's not competition. It's lifting folks up. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Erin Levzo, who was supposed to be here today and is not, in our conversation, she talked a lot about how she thinks women sometimes look around and think they have to be the only one because maybe there's only one woman in the room. And she's like, no, there's room for all of us. Like we all need to be helping each other get up there. And so just thinking back on that conversation she and I had a few weeks ago, it's very, very similar. Sarah, thoughts?
Yeah, I was very fortunate earlier in my career that I had people, women especially, that really kind of, put their arm around you and say, I'm going to take you along. And women that wouldn't be intuitive for them to kind of put their energy towards me. And so I think I learned very early on that as you come up in your career, you have an obligation to pay that forward. And it's really about, as you're saying, it's about intentionality. Like you have to be intentional because it is not intuitive for everybody. And so as you grow in your career, it only becomes much more of an obligation. And it's about seeking those opportunities that are not part of the normal day, not part of the normal team dynamic, to actively go out and tap on those people and say, I'm here for you, I'm a resource for you. And so that's something in my leadership style is about emanating that and showing that and being that example, but then also requiring my leadership team to do that and saying, who are you bringing along? Because as you said, there's space for everybody. And because of that, you create trust, you create that space, you create confidence, and that's really how you drive high performing teams.
Yeah, that's great. I want to talk to you a little bit about the hiring process at MGM and like or the feedback process.
Okay.
In a second.
Okay.
Beverly, what does that mean?
So this one's slightly controversial. I won an award a couple months back, and I remember someone said, "Do you have a couple words to say?" And I always got a couple of words to say. That's how I'm built. But I remember saying, as some advice, to give women a seat at the table and don't make it a card table or the kiddie table. Or I said a card table, and a bunch of women in the room clapped and applauded because they knew what that meant. A couple guys in the room were like, "What is she talking about? Like, what difference does it make what kind of table it is?" It matters. It matters. A former boss of Sarah and I used to work in the same place for a little while. I remember being in a big conference room where there were like blotters and these big white chairs, and folks at MGM or that have ever been to an MGM conference room will know this. They're big, beautiful white leather chairs, and there's a big oak table, and it's shiny, and there are blotters, and there's Fiji water. And that's where the important people sit. And the less important people sit on the back row. And imagine being the only woman in the room. Imagine being the only Black person in the room and having to sit on the back row. And the CEO made them open the space up and pull a chair in for me. And I got my own blotter and my own water. And from that point forward, I always got to sit at that ring. And I didn't say anything, and he didn't say anything, but he wanted to hear from me and thought that my opinion was important. And so he made space for me. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing that I would say is the reason Sarah can call me is because you don't just make room for the people behind you. You also don't compete with the people who are your peers. Don't feel the need to snipe and take out your peers. And I'm gonna stop the sermon right now. And so that means showing up for not just the people that are coming up behind you, but the people that might replace you or the people that could do it better. And so when Aaron couldn't make it, Sarah was like, "Bev, you ought to join us." And I was like, "I'm in town, happy to do it."
We're so glad that you're here too. Yeah, I think I really like that idea of making a seat like at the table for other people and making sure to drive that influence. What happens though if, just thinking about those times when you're in conversations maybe with your executive team and they're not seeing your point, and you need to have a tough conversation about either a focus group you're doing, like Sarah, we talked a little bit about a focus group, or when I mentioned that review process, like you talked about trying to like take the emotions out of it a little bit and focus really on the employee's talent. Like, how do you challenge, like if they hadn't made a seat for you, like how do you challenge that? How do you bring that up and say that's not okay, that there was no woman at the table, that there was no woman of color at the table? Like, how do you have that conversation?
Use your voice. I mean, it's very simple.
Very simple.
If no one, you hope that someone else is going to speak up for you. You want someone else to speak up for you. But if they don't, you have to be prepared to speak up for yourself. My mother said, "There's a poor dog that can't wag its own tail." So you got to be prepared to do it yourself.
It really is that simple. And we talk about this a lot at my level within MGM. We have all banded together and said, we will use our role. We will use our influence. My mother always told me growing up, use your power for good. And so it's about intentionally having that voice and knowing it's going to be controversial. I sat in a different conference room, same CEO, about this kind of research project we were doing, and we were bringing in this focus group of really celebrities and really just prolific people. And I looked at the agenda, and it was about 11 white men and 1 woman. And I was the only woman sitting in that conference room discussing this focus group. And you have that moment where it's like, do I say something? And I was like, I can't, again, 2 daughters, big mirror. I can't walk out of this room without saying something. And so I did. I said, we have to reevaluate this. I said, you cannot have these 12 people walk into this room. And was it uncomfortable? Hell yeah. Did my CEO kind of like look at me? He got it, but others in the room were like, did she really just say that? But I use that example because I wake up every day and I'm committed to having those tough conversations, because at our level, we have to. It is no longer should you, it is an obligation, because take women out of the name of this panel. It's about how are we driving inclusive leadership? And if we don't all personally commit to being that leader in the tiny moments, we will never make mass change.
Well, and I like what you said there, in tiny moments in every moment, right? This is not something where you have to let it build up and then you just wait and pick your moment because you've reached that level of frustration. It's a continual dialogue. It's continual modeling. It's continual questioning. It's continual, asking some of those hard questions and bringing different solutions to the table. And I think that's so important too, where it's not just a once in a while conversation or wait for something that's super large to bring up. It's got to be that continual change because that's how you move things forward.
So a bunch of tiny conversations happening, but do you find sometimes, like thinking about myself, I get a little nervous about having that kind of conversation. I get nervous about sharing something like that. Like, do you prep for it, or is it just identifying in the moment and feeling free to kind of candidly speak about it?
I think it's all of the above. I think it's if you commit to yourself that you're going to use your power for good, you're going to have those moments. Do I have those moments where I'm like, I'm going to walk in there and I'm going to say it and I'm going to prep and it's nerve-wracking? Of course. But also knowing in the moment as it's that fleeting moment and you're like, I have this one opportunity to just expose what just happened. And I'm very fortunate that I have peers who do the same thing. Not all of them, but we're getting more mass in numbers. But it is, back to the original question about bringing people along, I just fiercely believe you cannot do one or the other. You cannot bring people along and make space for people, but then not stand up for them when you have that moment in time.
And it is often, and Sarah and I've sort of been in battle together, fighting for good. And so it's easy to stand up for the people that you like. Like, I will stand up for Sarah every day, all day, and twice on Sunday.
You like me?
Girl, I got you. Got you. Like 4 flat tires. I'm down with you. But it's the people that you don't like who are trying to do right. Like, you don't always agree with them. They're not your ally. They don't look like you. They don't have a shared background with you. When you allow toxic behaviors to fester and take hold, because that's not your homie. That's not the one you have lunch with. That's not who you rock with on the weekends. Y'all don't go shopping together. Y'all don't fly together. If you can't stand up against wrong and put out those toxic behaviors, regardless of whether that's your favorite human or not, that's just as problematic.
Well, especially when you're elevated to the position of senior leadership like you all are, because you're trying to create an environment that's inclusive where you're not favoring certain employees or team members or whatnot. So I think that's like even more important, but a good lesson for people as they're rising in their careers as well, to think about that's the kind of person that people do want to be around, who is inclusive, who is inviting those folks into the conversation. Danielle, you had an interesting model. I think it's like a tweetable model about up, down, and center. And I liked that as a framework for thinking about how you were supporting those around you when you're in senior leadership. So do you want to just explain a little bit about that?
Oh, for sure. I love it. So I have a social moment. I'm with you. All right. So I put things in buckets, just as how my brain works. And I think that's part of the intentionality for me. And so up, down, and kind of across or in the center is thinking about how do you reach down? And we've talked a lot and touched on, mentoring that next generation. And there are formal mentor programs that exist. They exist at Adweek. They exist within companies, right? But there's also the informal piece. And I think being very clear, it's part of what I do in my own personal objectives every year, is to say, who are the folks? Sometimes they work in my company. Sometimes they're people that worked for me or with me 15 years ago. And you reach out and help continue to mentor them through the career, through their career. And I think that is super important. And so I set goals every year to say, who's on that list outside of the obvious, right? Again, reaching deeper down in the community and folks that maybe you haven't worked directly with in a number of years. The centerpiece is your peers. So love what you said. It's not a competition, it's support. And that, again, is not just within your own organization. I'm fortunate enough in Atlanta, I have a group of other women CMOs. We have nicknamed ourselves the Dynamos. So, and these are just folks who, different industries, some are in restaurants, some are not, but all of us have that marketing background and a community that we can challenge each other. We give each other feedback. We'll ask, are you championing when you should? Did you really, what happened in that situation? Did you stand up for that or champion it? But we're also there when they have a hard time or to celebrate the wins. It's all of it, right? And really building that community and being intentional about that. And then up, my boss just is new into her role. So she's president of all of our restaurant business units. Great, actually, both of the presidents of our business units are women at Focus Brands. And the first thing I asked after the announcement formally went out is I walk in her office and I literally said, what can I do for you? What do you need? What can I do to help you be most successful in this role? And I think that's really important too, because we have to support up as much as we ask up and champion as well for change.
That's great. Actually, it made me start thinking about the word, as you were saying that, authentic. We'll talk about that for a second. But because Danielle, I think in our short conversations like that sounds to me like authentically part of who you are is that you also want to help those above you. It's interesting because a conversation, I was listening to Anisha and she was talking about like crying in the office or bringing those emotions. And sometimes I think that can be your secret sauce a little bit. Like if you are just being who you are and saying what you feel and everyone knows they're going to get it from you straight. But talk to me a little bit about like authenticity and using that word, which is maybe a little bit of a buzzword right now. Beverly, I'm teeing that one up for you.
We had a great pre-chat on this.
So I'm a big believer in being who I am. And so I work in social companies. I have had social roles. I live in sort of the space of social. So it's really important to me that the person you talk to online is the person that you encounter at a cocktail party, at a baseball game, or wherever, or on stage. So I'm really for your authentic brand. Here is where the wheels start to fall off the bus for me. We've somehow decided that authenticity is equal to inclusion, equity, and diversity. We've also decided that that is now the person who is most likely to be covered by the DE&I umbrella's responsibility to carry that banner for the company or the organization. I cannot be, as the only Black female leader, to be the source of your DE&I message. When you as a leader are unable to authentically connect with your team or with an opportunity or an idea, you don't get to punt that shit back across the fence to me. Because I don't got you like that. I don't. We have to decide that authenticity means being able to do the right thing, to speak to people candidly, to be honest with people, to hold people accountable, and to be able to share learnings with people. Authentic does not mean that you need to go find a person that looks like the person who speaks Spanish in the office or the person who has come as an immigrant into this country, and to find somebody like that and partner them with that. And that's your opportunity to be authentic and or to solve the DE&I issue that you may or may not be having. That's not fair to people that look like me and people that show up like in one of the groups that's covered by that. It's also not fair to put it on your ERG. It's just not. Everybody has to be accountable to that.
Agreed. Retweet. I'll go a little different direction. I think what I'm struggling with the word authentic right now and how it's being catapulted into a trend of sorts across all marketing strategies is it's like that Margaret Thatcher quote, like being powerful is like being a lady. If you have to say you are, then you aren't. That's authenticity. You don't talk about being authentic, you just be authentic, and it's a manifestation of who you are in every scenario. And so I struggle with this whole movement around being authentic because we should all just be. And that's authenticity at its true core.
We should be and allow people to be. So we talked about that thing about like the Zoom culture or the camera culture. There are some people who don't want you to know what's going on in their house. And the idea they have to turn their camera on and you now know what kind of sheets they sleep under or what is on their bed or what their dog looks like or what their kid looks like. Like, they shouldn't be held accountable to helping you to feel that that's some weird level of authenticity for you.
And that's not being authentic. That goes right back to leadership intentionally creating safe spaces for their teams to be authentic. And so a lot of it comes back to how you're driving your influence and creating that safety, because our job as leaders is to create a space where you can be your authentic self.
Well, and to be the best that you can be, and it's interesting to hear you speak on the diversity piece. So for me, it's something that also touches very personally because my husband is Colombian. so South American, and we have squarely in our house some of the most, different views, perspectives, background that we get from his family and from my family, very different backgrounds, right? And our kids get, all 5 of them, get all of that blended together. And it's interesting, and I find myself having a reaction sometimes when people will look to put folks in buckets. Who's diverse, who's not? Well, is my husband diverse and I'm not? I will argue with you, because guess what? It's all about mindset. It's about blending those diverse outlooks, the diverse approaches, and having people bring that to the table to be the best that you can be. I had that very discussion at work. I said, of course, clearly I'm cognizant that I am white and I am, American. However, I feel that diversity in our households, and my kids certainly are, right? And it's about the mindset. It's about cultivating that diversity and perspective and what that means in bringing to the table those different perspectives to get the best outcome in leadership decisions.
One of those examples of like, you just don't know what someone's perspective or their life view is and how it shapes their work and how it shapes how they show up. And so you shouldn't decide or define for people what that looks like. And so being authentic is everybody's obligation. It's not a cape that you pull out of the closet and wear.
Yeah, I love that. How do we, like, thinking about authentic and thinking about like stereotypes that are prevalent about different types of people or whatnot, how do we create a space where people can like just be authentic? I don't even want to use the word authentic anymore. Just be. Like, how do we create a place where people can just be, but also make sure, and maybe this is wrong, like you can, I don't know, I'm like a little bit afraid to say what I'm about to say, but like also make sure we are kind of recognizing we're still at work and not necessarily like out in social with our friends. So I think there does need to be some level of maybe like thought before we just say every single thing that we're feeling, because some of us could get fired for that. I don't know. I'm just, the question is just, how do we allow people to just be, but also make sure that we're keeping like a productive work environment?
Focus on the work. Like, it's not, we say this a lot, and I've been across like hospitality and travel and gaming and social and media and entertainment. Focus on the work, whether it was producing a television show or opening a new hotel or launching a new product. It's about the work. The work gets better when there are diverse perspectives, and those people have an opportunity to bring that. I'm gonna now go through the airport and think about all the food that I eat from, I was gonna be shoveling stuff in my bag tomorrow. But it is literally about letting people show up in service of the work.
Yeah, and cultivating a team that believes deeply in the product. Like one of the things I am most proud of and is so beautiful about the marketing team at MGM is like everyone feels so deeply like vested in what we do. We entertain people at the most it's a fundamental human need to be entertained, and we provide that service. And so that's part of our finding the personality that believes in that as deeply as we do. That's part of our recruitment. It's part of our hiring. It's how we engage our team. But we also create a safe space for them to show up and be their true self. But at the core of it, we don't have that problem, because at the core of it, we're all just there because we believe deeply in what we do for our customers.
Yeah, that's great.
She's telling the truth because the alumni network from MGM is so strong.
Yeah, that's great. And it's similar to what you were saying, Danielle, about like your team representing who you're serving like in the community, to make sure that like there's like a match there as well, I think.
Yeah, our overarching value, because we feed people, is that we feed people and potential. And that's so important for us. It's about the communities, but our communities are our customers, they're our employees, and they're our franchisees. These are people's livelihoods, right? And in that, you have to have diversity and perspective, but you focus on the work, right? To operate and run a restaurant, there is absolutely a functional skill set that you need. You cannot just show up one day. I would highly advise this. Even if you decide you want to cash out your 401k and franchise a restaurant, please don't do that unless you have a great operator as a partner, right? So there are functional things that you clearly need, but there are a lot of different ways to go about building that team in that restaurant and making it effective and reflecting the community. And so for us, it's something that we talk about regularly, is that feeding people and potential concept.
I imagine people can't just show up in pajamas at work either.
No.
I'm just saying.
Yes. No pajamas. No pajamas. And in fact, to get around that too, you still have uniforms in the restaurants, right? You have to, because you have to have some norms. And I think that's what you're getting at. They're absolutely norms. And I think sometimes the dialogue goes too far one way or the other. This is not about getting away from norms. It's not about getting away from safety. It's not about getting away from practicality in how you have to get work done. You have to show up sometimes in certain jobs. Certainly if you have a schedule in a restaurant, you need to be there when you say. You can't be like, my perspective is a little diverse from that, so I'm just not going to show up at 10 a.m. No, that does not work.
Because the minute I get a sticky bun with no little icing on it, we're going to fight.
Oh,
But if you believe in the product so deeply, that uniform becomes a badge of honor.
That's right.
And we see that. We have, 75,000 employees. We have tons of uniformed frontline employees, and we have amongst the longest tenure of frontline long-term employees in our industry because they just believe so deeply in the experience. And so I think, that's what you rally everyone around, and you ensure that you're representing your customer base and that you have that diverse perspective. But at the end of the day, we all just believe so much in what we do.
you're talking about purpose, right? There's a shared purpose.
I listened to an interesting podcast about that, but I don't want to go too far in that direction right now. I want to take it back for 1 second. So Danielle, you've talked a lot about community, and I think a topic we talked a little bit about was in this type of position that all of you are in, which is a very high pressure situation. You have families, you have spouses, you have animals, friends, home lives. How do you manage it all? Like, what are your tips to others that are quickly rising up the ranks, and how they're able then to manage that life and live that myth of having it all?
You don't manage it. It's not, that's the myth. There is no perfect balance. There is your life and how you take your bucket of energy and allocate it however you want. And so what I tell, new moms who work for me, or, people that are really kind of just approaching this for the first time in their careers, it's stop trying to manage it. Like, you are going to toggle between all of these different components of your life, and as long as you can look in the mirror and you're dispersing your energy as to the best of your ability, like, you have to stop this focus on, like, how do I manage it?
And do you think, like Linda said earlier, she was thinking about earlier in her career how she just, like, pre-COVID felt like a failure, like, because she was failing at motherhood and she was failing at her career. I'm sure neither of those things were true, but that's how she was feeling. Like, so how do you help people see that, like, you don't need to be perfect at everything? Like, what are those lessons you impart on your own mentees, team members?
So, one of the things that I try to model, and I'm horrible at this, and so recognizing your own frailties, right? Your own failures. I'm really bad at self-care. I somehow use the facialist as an opportunity to take a nap. I somehow use the hair braider as an opportunity to pound out emails. I did something, and I had been saying to the team earlier this year, because, I worked at Twitter up until a couple weeks ago, and I've been saying to the team, guys, it's super stressful. There's a lot going on. Take some time off. But I was saying that to them, and I wasn't doing it myself. And in September, I decided to take 10 days, me and my girls, we went to Paris and Saint-Tropez. We danced on tables. We drank champagne and ate cheese in the middle of the night in our pajamas. And we bought really expensive bags. But I also didn't read any emails. I didn't call anybody back. I didn't have any words for anybody. If you saw it on the timeline, you saw it. But modeling good behavior is a way to show that you should do that work for yourself. You should tell them and then show them. Right? It's just that simple. And otherwise, everybody fails if you don't take that time, because you just burn out of it.
Yeah, that's great.
Go ahead. I was going to say the other part of that too is I say you don't do it yourself, right? We talked about building a tribe. So for me, I mentioned I have 5 kids. It's a lot. And so this morning, the tribe came full force. Actually, yesterday morning, my son missed the bus. My husband and I are here in New York. We're like, all right, that's awesome, right? And so you reach out to the people in the neighborhood, because I've cultivated this group of women, other career-minded women. Some run supply chain for those companies, some are media executives, but we help each other. They're all on my kids' school pickup list. I'm on theirs. there's this community, and some are also non-working moms, and it's about building that tribe and building that village, and then having those honest conversations. We'll go away for girls' weekend, or at least a day, right? You get up, you go to the spa, you be intentional about it, and you're there at 10 o'clock at night when someone's like, I have just had a day where I am failing everybody. I forgot little Johnny at his practice, and then I missed my conference call going to pick him up, right? I'm terrible as a mom. And you're there for them. And you're like, no, you're not, right? Because this is the reality. And I think having those safe, honest conversations, I would say, is one of the single most important things that you can do, is find that tribe that can empathize with you, and your job is to support them when they're struggling, and their job is to support you. And when you can find that, to me, that's the true definition of authenticity as well, right? And I think it's important.
Yeah, you talked about imposter syndrome. Like, it's very, very real, and everyone in this room has felt it at some point. And so I still feel it, but I try to be very cognizant of that with my team. And we keep talking about intentionality and being really intentional, and self-care and building your tribe are critical kind of tools in that toolkit. But also, for me personally, transparency. And so whereas there have been times recently, quite honestly, where like something has gone terribly wrong at work, and I would typically call my tribe, I would call my friends, I would call Bev, I would call others. In those moments, I'm actually calling my team. So I have team members in the room right now. I had a really shitty day about a week or two ago, and I called one of my direct reports and I said, hey, I just need to be real for a second. Can I just talk to you about what I'm going through? And I think it's a nuance, and I don't think as leaders, they say leadership is hiding your anxiety. No, share that with them, because that's how you build safety. That's how you also you validate that imposter syndrome in them. You validate that it's okay to feel that way. So like when I don't know what to do, and I'm like, oh, I'm the big boss, so I'm supposed to know everything. No, I call my team, and 99% of the time they're helping me through it.
I just want to double tap into that for a second, because I actually do the same thing, and I don't know if we sort of like learn that from each other.
We've never talked about it.
I don't know. We've never talked about that. That's true, right? but exactly the same thing, right? Like, I've had a really rough 6 months, just full stop, a shitty 6 months. I need some time to just be back to who I am and who I know and I love and I care. But there's a woman in the room tonight, right? And I have been open and transparent with her all through the process, because my stepping away meant she has to step up. And I don't want her to be misled about what leadership at this level looks like. And so whether she gets the title, whether she gets the pay, it is going to fall back in her lap to some degree. And so she needs to know the truest form of leadership that I can show to her is what it actually looks like at the top, so that when her moment is in the light, she's not startled by that. And so being transparent and honest and sharing that with your team and sharing that burden with your team is really, really smart.
I love that. That's amazing. I think the best leader I ever had taught me that when you're the leader, you don't necessarily need to have all the answers. You need to look for the answers. And she was amazing, and I learned so much working with her. But I think too, even Sarah, like you were sharing, like talking to your team a little bit about it, and going to them, getting some answers from them, just chatting it through, being you, just being, not authentic, but
We've traumatized her about that word.
I know. Well, we have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to see if there are any questions. Anybody? I'm sorry I haven't looked at this.
If you're not, Sarah and I are going to dance.
Hello.
Absolutely not.
Please ask them questions. They're very funny.
Hi, I'm Sarah from Nielsen. I just want to say this panel almost made me cry. I'm like sitting there nodding, yes. One of the things I think about that's really important, I try to help with my team, is just to have empathy for people. And I think it's something we try to lean into a lot, but in an authentic way and not bringing it back to being all about yourself. Do you have any, because that's hard not to do too, but do you have any kind of tips along that vein about being authentic, or examples of how that's worked for you? Because sometimes I get stuck. I want to use an example of I've gone through, but then it's not about me. It's about listening to the team member.
I think you should level up empathy, because look, empathy is like, we learned during the pandemic no more, like at no other time, how critically important having empathy as a leader is. But it comes back to that intentionality, right? Like just as as a leader, you are obligated. We got a lot of hats to wear. We got to bring people along. We have to create safe spaces. We have to be transparent. Oh, and we have to hit critical business goals, all while
Make
doing
money.
all that. But empathy is just as critical as one of those KPIs, and it's not intuitive for everybody, right? Like we can all name someone we work with that has zero empathy. And so just as we talked about, like in those moments, I have committed to myself and my peers that I will call it out in the moment. And so on one hand, it's when I'm seeing my peers not putting themselves in other people's shoes or not just opening their aperture of what that person could be going through, I will address it with them. I'm a truth teller. That is part of my brand. But the other part as a leader is like when I'm talking to my team and they're coming to me, so-and-so, this is happening, so-and-so. I don't make it about me because I could make that story like, well, I've gone through this before. I've seen this before. Instead, it's like you just have to stop and say, what do you think's going on there? Have you thought about that person's perspective? And it's a very, very simple thing, but you have to like be intentional about it and just ask them the question. And then look, if it's natural for you to say, well, hey, I experienced something similar, that's okay. You're the leader. It's your job to kind of share your experience, especially if it's going to drive progress. But I think it's this idea of like empathy is another intentionality that we have to deploy every time we talk to anybody. It's not always innate. It's a learned behavior in some cases.
Well, and I think through that, and you said it in the middle of what you were saying, is I was going to say two words for me that I think really help, which is just ask. And there's different flavors of what you're just asking, but just asking that question opens the door to a conversation and opens the door to them sharing. And it also opens the door to you helping whoever you're engaged in that conversation with, especially if they brought a problem or they're struggling with something. Going through a series of questions helps them to self-solve, right? And come up with the solution. And I think it just helps when you ask instead of talking, right? Ask, pull it out, let them kind of talk and share. And it's a guided way to sometimes facilitate empathy into something that also resolves and moves them forward.
I just want to say vulnerability and credibility build trust, and trust is a through line through leadership.
Actually, I have a follow-up question about that. So I was asking from the perspective of like leading in my team. You're looking up and the person above you is not empathetic. Sorry. So my follow-up question. So if the person above you is non-empathetic, like how do you, without saying like you really suck at understanding what I'm going through, how do you lead them to be more empathetic? Like I said point blank to someone, I don't know that you understand what I'm going through, and their answer was, but I'm really trying. And in my head I was thinking, but none of your actions are not displaying any of that. So I don't know if there's a way to lead the leaders.
Give yourself a little bit of credit, because the fact that you said that and you opened that conversation, you're doing it right. Like it's to the point, just ask, and you already deployed that kind of leadership courage and that vulnerability to say that. So give yourself a little bit of credit in how you handle it. You can't change that person or how they're going to do it, but if you are finding those intentional moments to expose them in a professional way, that's all you can do.
I also think too, sometimes we expect people to change immediately, like especially when it comes to the topic of empathy. And I think empathy comes more natural to some people than others. So I like that Sarah you called it out to this person. And I think that person was also being vulnerable, saying like, I'm trying. Like sometimes taking what someone says at face value rather than being like, well, it doesn't seem like she is trying. Maybe they really are trying. And you have to kind of take them at that word.
Which is empathy.
Last question.
Oh, I'm lucky. I'm the last question. My question is, how are you guys keeping your teams inspired? I feel like we've been through the paper shredder a little bit the last couple of years, and like there's a lot of things that are going on, and there's talk of the Great Resignation and now recession and, you know, yada, yada, yada. How do you guys keep each other, like, keep your teams inspired and excited? I understand, like, yes, be empathetic to anything they're going through, but like, how do you like get everybody jazzed up?
Well, it's not perfect. And I don't think anybody has like the perfect approach on how to do that. I think for us, first and foremost, we have our daily jobs. We just deal in the best content in the world. So that in itself, again, we all feel so deeply about what we do. So that jazzes us up. But when you're having those tough conversations, or when you're preparing for this impending recession, and we all know we're all going through budgeting right now, and it is a through point of all these conversations. It's just showing up for them in a way that, like, look, I might not be able to get you all the resources we discussed next year, but I'm going to help you prioritize. We're going to become master prioritizers. And if someone's trying to put something on your plate that it shouldn't, I'm going to fight for you. And so inspiration shows up in different ways. It's not always rah, rah, this is so fun, things are great, let's do fun things and have social happy hours and stuff. Inspiration also is inspiring them in the tough times and just showing up for them and being that leader that they need, because it might not all be great news, but if they feel supported, then they're inspired to continue doing what they do.
And I think why. Everyone wants to know why they're doing something. And sometimes it's a why that is, hey, we're facing a tough business climate. So if you couple why with giving people the opportunity to participate in that plan and have those dialogues, it just feels much more part of them, right? And they understand it. I think that's super important. If you miss the why, it's really hard to get anyone energized.
And I always say, don't negate the little moments. Like, inspiration doesn't have to be big things. Inspiration can be as simple as calling someone, saying, hey, what's going on? You okay? Like, every tiny moment matters. Bring it 360.
All right. Thank you so much to our panel.